Hello, everyone. Very excited for us to be here with John Moran, who is our returning champ from SaaS, where he's the head of Martech Solutions Marketing. Jonathan, welcome back.
Scott, Franz, great to be back with you guys. I feel like we're in the ring for another round. Can't wait to jump into our discussion today.
Well,
Looking
things
forward to
certainly
it.
don't slow down in the world of Martech. It feels like every time we get together to chat, like the world has made huge leaps forward. And we're going to get into some really spicy ones for that. But first, for the folks in our audience who don't know you yet, what's the span of Martech Solutions at SaaS, and what's your role at the company?
Yeah, great question. So to start off, yeah, I work at SaaS, which is traditionally known for data management and analytics. We've been in the space for over 40 years, but not as well known are our solution lines that include Martech and adtech. So on the Martech side, we have a multi-channel marketing hub that includes capabilities like audience creation, journey management, channel activation, and everything that kind of lies within that, all the capabilities needed. And then on the adtech side, we have a first-party sell-side ad server. So SaaS as an organization has been in the MarTech space for about 23 years, and I've been at the company about half of that time. My business title, yeah, head of MarTech Solutions Marketing. Pretty descriptive and self-explanatory, but I do a little bit of everything from messaging to analyst work to presentations to being able to talk with you guys, which is one of my favorite parts of the job.
Thank you so much. And that's a great wide span of marketing capabilities. And I wonder about the next topic. And normally we end with that one, but now we would like to start with it. And it's a very spicy one. Is generative AI a bubble in your mind? And why not?
Wow, what a question, Franz. Right off the beginning, hitting me with that one. I don't know if it's a bubble in that it'll fully burst, but I think that it is. It's a bit overhyped currently, given its span of capability, particularly within Martech. I think when organizations start moving beyond what we deem to be foundational use cases in marketing, which are things like audience and content creation, recommendations, classifications, tone adjustments on content and copy, into more enhanced use cases, including creating interaction tasks, business decisions and workflows, and then journeys, and then into more immersive use cases. Really, the idea of using generative AI to operate a piece of software from a chat or some sort of interactive experience. I think we'll then see Gen AI move out of what Gartner and others like to call the trough of disillusionment into that plateau of productivity. So will the bubble deflate, or is it deflating? Yes, I think so, given the current value that brands are receiving versus like the data, the processing, the technology, the power cost required to operate the technology effectively.
It's amazing how often we see that hype curve pattern. Franz, I feel like you have like a PhD in the dynamics of the hype curve. We're going to have more of that in the report that's being released here today. But all right, John, I'd like to push on the economics of Gen AI a little bit deeper. In general, we're used to seeing the costs of computing decrease over time. Is that expected with Gen AI too? Or are the ways in which those costs are perhaps being subsidized right now just a big gap that we're going to have to close first?
So short answer is yes. I do think that computing cost with generative AI will decrease. At least I hope so. And I mean, this has been the case with almost every technology in history up to this point, right? As humans and machines get better at using and interfacing with the technology. But I think, if we think about the three largest costs related to generative AI, right? Compute resources are probably number one, right? Training large AI models requires computational power involving thousands of GPUs or TPUs running for weeks or even months. And these resources are expensive, and as we've already seen, they can cost millions of dollars. Data acquisition and management, right? High quality and diverse data sets are crucial for using generative AI and creating effective generative models underneath those Gen AI interfaces. So gathering, curating, storing these data sets can be very costly, especially when dealing with those large volumes of data. And then one aspect that people don't typically think about as much is energy consumption,
Mhm.
right? And so the energy required for training and running these models is significant, right? Large scale model training can consume enormous amounts of electricity, contributing to high operational costs and environmental concerns as well. So you've got these costs, but then you've got other costs, right? R&D costs, model maintenance and update costs, infrastructure costs, compliance and legal costs. So yeah, there's a ton of cost associated with Gen AI. And right now, I don't think that those Gen AI costs are being subsidized by corporate investments, VC funds, grants, cloud service providers, or open source in the broader tech community to the degree that they would need to be for companies to turn a significant profit or see significant return on generative AI investments.
Oh, wow. So on that cost side, are there any use cases for generative AI where you think the economics or the ROI will make sense in maybe the short term versus the long term?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at it from kind of a simple math perspective, right, the ROI must outweigh the cost or expense. So that means that incremental improvements to these foundational use cases are not going to get us there. I think it must be more of a paradigm shift where we see business processes change as a result of generative AI. And I think we're starting to see that, right? So, for example, if I can monetize or assign value to, say, an enhanced use case of creating a high number of journeys or decision flows and demonstrate the cost savings of embedding generative AI to help produce those flows and show that it outweighs the expense, I think that then things will start making sense. However, I don't think that's going to happen until both costs come down and improved integration of generative AI into Martech solutions starts occurring beyond just those foundational use cases that we talked about.
So SAS recently produced a report called Marketers in Gen AI Diving into the Shallow End, which kind of a provocative title there. Why are we in the shallow end and how do we swim beyond it?
Yeah, as we were thinking about the title and creating the report, I think it's really a perfect metaphor for where we are today with generative AI, right? As we all know, really bad things can happen when you dive into the shallow end of a swimming pool. The same kind of thing can happen when you yell squirrel or shiny object and go after generative AI initiatives just because it's what all the cool kids are doing. So you will, as an organization, undoubtedly run into issues. And what we saw in the research was, of the 300 or so marketers that we surveyed, there are some significant issues, and if you don't have a lot of processes in place around the use of, say, traditional AI, which we're going to talk about a little more as we move on, then you're certainly going to have a problem with generative AI. And the research, which we've got out, it's easy to find and consume. It's at sas.com/GenAI-marketing if people want to take a look at it. It highlights some of the issues that organizations run into once they get beyond those compute, those data, and those energy challenges.
Yeah, that was a great report. There were a number of things that sort of leaped out at me, but one in particular was how few companies reported having a comprehensive Gen AI governance framework. I think the number is something around 7%. And also, for that matter, how many had a high level of training around any such governance, which was even lower. It was 5%. So clearly, this is what do they call that? Terra incognito. For at least most marketers at this point. Help educate folks who are listening in on this. What should such a comprehensive governance framework actually cover?
Yeah, so before we get into the framework, and I'll kind of go through it at a high level, I wanted to kind of key in on some points you made about the research and some of the interesting data points that it highlighted, right? So, for example, 85% of all marketing personas that participated in the research, 85% said that they use generative AI daily. IT personas, 81%. Finance personas, 75%. So we're seeing generative AI being used, right? So good usage across personas in an organization. However, then we look at some of the stats, right? 7% with a governance framework, 5% with a high level of training around generative AI governance and monitoring. 9% of organizations are fully prepared to comply with generative AI regulations. So what that indicates is there's a major gap between usage and readiness. And what does that create, right? A gap between usage and readiness. I think that creates both concern for organizations, but also outside of organizations. And I think it creates risk. And we see that show up when we ask the question, what are your concerns regarding the usage of generative AI in your organization? The top 3 concerns that came back: data privacy, security, and governance. And all 3 of those were higher than ethics, accuracy, bias, costs, trust, etc. So what this screams to me is enablement and education are needed, right, in the short term. And a framework is needed in the longer term that allows organizations to ensure that generative AI as an emerging technology is used in the proper way. So you asked, what should be in such an enabling framework? So I've got 10 things. I don't know if it makes sense to go through all 10 of these, but I will kind of summarize, right? So obviously you've got to have a scope and objectives for generative AI usage. You've got to have ethical guidelines that include transparent communication about how AI is making decisions and generating outputs. You've got to make sure that privacy and data protection are in place. How are you handling data that's used with generative AI? How are you complying with laws, regulations around collection, storage, usage, that sort of thing? QA, you've obviously got to test and make sure that when you're using generative AI and assigning it to different use cases, that there's accuracy in the output and what it's doing, right? Legal and compliance, training and education, governance. So a lot of around, this framework really focuses a lot on looking at the different ways that you can govern the technology for the use of the generative AI within and across departments in the organization, right? So you've got to make sure that it's giving you those accurate outputs that you can continually improve on, right? That continuous improvement process, so that generative AI continues to get better with its usage in your organization.
Wow, and that's all on top of what we've been doing already, right? So of course there's not only generative AI, that's not the only AI. So what's happening with the classic AI of machine learning, predictive analytics? Are we neglecting the opportunity there by over-indexing on generative AI?
Frans, I think to some degree, yes, we are. I think that we're neglecting traditional or classic AI as a result of focusing so heavily on generative AI. Well, you might ask, well, how so, right? There's similarities, obviously, similarities and differences between traditional AI and generative AI. Traditional AI, as we all know, is basically a problem solver, where generative AI, at least right now, is more of an assistant, right? So, if we focus too heavily on the assistant aspect of things without first solving the problem, we obviously run into issues. So I'll provide an example. Traditional AI is used to detect patterns and behavior in order to drive things like product recommendations. Generative AI is then used to create content which you could attach to those recommendations. So if we focus just on the content without determining who, what, when a product recommendation should go out, then we miss the mark. We kind of put the cart before the horse, so to speak. So I think the best approach, at least for now, is to use both, but at an appropriate cadence without over focusing on one over the other.
So is that how you see generative AI and classic AI intersecting, or how can they work together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they absolutely will work together and should work together. I think a great example that we commonly talk about at SaaS is this idea of what's called customer journey optimization.
Yeah.
So customer journey optimization applies reinforcement learning, which is a type of artificial intelligence. It collects and contextualizes data shows that data to an algorithm, and then allows that algorithm to learn and recommend customer engagement actions. So, reinforcement learning differs from standard supervised learning or propensity-based targeting by not relying on historical data for model training. Instead, it learns from experience data, trial and error, testing, and that sort of thing. So that allows marketers to leverage the entire body of customer journey analytical methods in a much more efficient, appropriate, and systematic manner. And so, with CJO, marketers learn more in less time, and then, it essentially guides consumers to end conversion events versus forcing them down a predefined path that a brand might set. So using that type of artificial intelligence for reinforcement learning for customer journey optimization, and then appending generative AI and the capabilities that it has, allows you to really create that customer experience and that pattern and method of interactions with the appropriate content, tone, that sort of thing, to really delight consumers versus making them feel like they are being marketed to, so to speak.
Wow, there's so much here. I feel like we could easily pick your brain for like a couple hours on these topics. I guess being cognizant of time. So, the overarching theme here, for this session is what marketers should be preparing for, what they should be thinking of as they head into 2025. What would be the closing advice you would want to give to marketers and marketing ops teams as they prepare for the year ahead?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that in Martech now we're kind of seeing history repeat itself to some degree, right? I think Martech kind of moves in cycles, right? So we're getting back to brands really just wanting to do and provide and help consumers manage that exceptional customer experience, right? And sometimes it's through simple Martech techniques, right? Like creating the right type of audiences, activating them with the appropriate insights and that sort of thing. So, my main advice to marketers would be, stay focused, right? Focus on what really matters in Martech, which is increasing customer value through that creation and activation of exceptional customer journeys. I mean, there's so many distractions. You guys know this. You talk about them all day long, right? It's terminology changes. Well, we're going to call the customer data platform the data collaboration platform now. It's data changes. We're going to remove third-party cookies. Just kidding. No, we're not. So, and then it's technology changes. Oh, here comes generative AI. Well, generative AI and AI, they've been around for a long time, but they're kind of the new shiny object right now. It's easy to get distracted. It's easy to get stuck in the mire, right? Trying to solve for things that might not need solving at this point in time. So, my closing advice to marketers would be, rise above, stay strategic, right? Don't get mired in that tactical, and go out there and kill it for the sake of your customers.
Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you for the sage advice. Very well said. Jonathan, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate the perspective you brought, and we'll see you in 2025.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Frans. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.